Good evening and welcome once again to the second course offered by UPM, or the People's Marian University of the Focolare Movement. In a week, it will be Christmas. May baby Jesus, who was born in a manger on that first Christmas day, be born again, this time in our hearts and among us. So, Merry Christmas. As you would remember, the theme of this year's course is dialogue and evangelization. During our last lesson, we talked about our evangelizing mission as church, specifically in the Philippines. We learned to be sentinels of hope for our times. Today, we shall discuss dialogue and evangelization in the Encyclical Fratelli, Tutti, and particularly in the part that deals with religions at the service of fraternity in our world. Why specifically that part? Let us ask Father Rolando Garcia to answer that question. Father Rolly is not a newcomer to UPM. He too was one of our professors last year. But for those who joined us only now, Father Rolando Garcia is a priest of the Archdiocese of Manila. At present, Father Rolly is a spiritual director at the San Carlos Seminary Philosophy Department, and he is also professor at the seminary's Graduate School of Theology. He is also an assistant secretary at the Apostolic Nunciature in Manila. In the Archdiocese of Manila, Father Rolly heads the Ministry on Biblical Apostolate. And together with the Daughters of St. Paul, he hosts the program Ang Biblia Ngayon over Radio Veritas on Sunday evenings. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Father Rolando Garcia.
Good day. I am privileged to deliver to you today the lecture on Dialogue and Evangelization, a reflection on the 8th chapter of Fratelli Tutti. Our talk today is divided into 3 parts. The first is a short introduction on the Encyclical Fratelli Tutti and its place and significance in the magisterium of Pope Francis. The second part is a reflection on the 8th chapter of Fratelli Tutti, numbers 271 to 287. And the last part would be a reflection on dialogue, evangelization, especially interreligious dialogue, and the 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines. We begin with a short introduction on the Encyclical Fratelli Tutti and its place and significance in the magisterium of Pope Francis. Inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, Pope Francis releases the third encyclical of his pontificate entitled Fratelli Tutti on October 3, 2020. The Holy Father describes it as a social encyclical which aims to promote a universal aspiration toward fraternity and social friendship. The encyclical proposes a way of life marked by the flavor of the gospel, calling us to love others as brothers and sisters, even when they are far from us, to open fraternity, to recognizing and loving every person with a love without borders, to encounter others in a way that can overcome all distance and every temptation to engage in disputes, impositions, or submissions. While Pope Francis was writing Fratelli Tutti, the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. This unexpected global health emergency has added significance and relevance to its message of solidarity and fraternity, since this health crisis has helped demonstrate that no one can face life in isolation, and that the time has truly come to dream then as a single human family in which we are brothers and sisters all. In the face of present-day attempts to eliminate or to ignore others, Fratelli Tutti is an invitation to respond to God's call with a new vision of fraternity and social friendship. The Holy Father hopes that in these times, we can contribute to the rebirth of a universal aspiration to fraternity by acknowledging the dignity of every human person. His invitation in these circumstances to think in new ways about our brothers and sisters is so timely. Pope Francis is giving us a roadmap for new ways, rooted in the gospel, calling the peoples of the world to recognize the dignity of every person, every people. Now, his message is completely consistent with the other things that he has written, and indeed, the messages of previous popes, notably Pope Benedict XVI, Saint John Paul II, and Saint Paul VI, whose writings he quotes in this encyclical. It also resonates with the document Nostra Aetate of the Second Vatican Council, which recognized everything that is good in the different faiths of the world. Pope Francis continues in Fratelli Tutti to call us to what I see as a continuing theme in all of his writings: the need for listening and the need to give time. These themes are also present in the apostolic exhortations Amoris Laetitia and Evangelii Gaudium. Let us now proceed to the second part, the 8th chapter of Fratelli Tutti, which is composed of paragraphs number 271 to 287. In the 8th and last chapter of this encyclical of Fratelli Tutti, entitled Religions at the Service of Fraternity in Our World, Pope Francis offers a hopeful outlook on the contribution of religions to human brotherhood and peace. It is important to note that what the Pope puts forward in the field of interreligious dialogue is not born only of a personal interest, agenda, or conviction, but as the head of the Catholic Church, he promotes a spirit of dialogue that is held important in the whole of Catholic tradition. These teachings and practices were already defined in a clear way during the Second Vatican Council with the document Nostra Aetate, or the Declaration of the Relation of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, which was proclaimed by Saint Pope Paul VI on October 28, 1965. There are two important points raised by Pope Francis in this chapter, namely, the conviction that all religions are in the service of fraternity, and an appeal for peace, justice, and fraternity. The first point, all religions are in the service of fraternity. The starting point is that believers of different religions should open up to God as the Father of all. They should join together before God as the truth which transcends the various religious interpretations. In this way, when we look for God with a sincere heart, we will meet fellow travelers who are also in search of God, without being entrenched in ideological principles. Seeking God helps us recognize one another as traveling companions, truly brothers and sisters. The world is in crisis today, says Pope Francis, because a kind of attempt to remove God from society has emerged. Purely secular and material interests have completely supplanted transcendent values. And the denial of religious freedom and freedom of conscience leaves humanity impoverished. The Church, therefore, has a public role to play in creating ways of promoting and encouraging human dignity and universal fraternity. In this way, the Church shows herself as a mother. She builds bridges, she breaks down walls, and she sows seeds of reconciliation. From this standpoint, the Church wants to esteem the ways in which God works in other religions. And in line with what was taught at the Second Vatican Council, the Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for their manner of life and conduct, their precepts and doctrines, which often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men and women. At the same time, she asserts that the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that is what inspires her actions and commitments. For the Church, in order that the journey of peace to be possible, the point of departure must be God's way of seeing things. For God sees with his heart. That is why any form of religious intolerance is unacceptable. Violence has no basis in our fundamental religious convictions. Religion can never be the cause of terrorism. Instead, it is mutual poverty, oppression, and injustice that form the basis of terrorism. And these also abuse religion to commit terrorist acts. This is the reason why religious leaders must do everything in their power to engage in and maintain dialogue with one another, thereby contributing effectively to world peace and suppressing all forms of extremism. Sincere and humble worship of God bears fruit in respect for life, dignity, and freedom. Let us now go to the second point of chapter 8, and it is an appeal for peace, justice, and fraternity. At the end of this chapter, Pope Francis quotes the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together, a document which he signed on February 4, 2019 in Abu Dhabi, along with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad Al-Tayyib. And from that milestone of interreligious dialogue, the Holy Father returns to the appeal that in the name of human fraternity, dialogue must be adopted as the way, common cooperation as the conduct, and mutual knowledge as the method and standard. He recalls how he and the Grand Imam resolutely declared that religions must never incite war, hateful attitudes, hostility, and extremism, nor must they incite violence or the shedding of blood. These tragic realities are the consequence of a deviation from religious teachings. They result from a political manipulation of religions and from interpretations made by religious groups who, in the course of history, have taken advantage of the power of religious sentiment in the hearts of men and women. God the Almighty has no need to be defended by anyone and does not want his name to be used to terrorize people. We now proceed to the third and last chapter of this lecture. And this is about interreligious dialogue and the 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines. Preparing for the celebration of the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Christianity in the country, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines declared 2020, the eve of the Jubilee, as the year of ecumenism, interreligious dialogue, and the indigenous peoples. The theme of the celebration was Dialogue Towards Harmony. In his pastoral letter inaugurating the year, the then CBCP President Archbishop Romulo Valles of Davao explains why dialogue is an essential element of evangelization. We quote, As the church undertakes its evangelizing mission, the spirit of dialogue, manifested as an attitude of respect and friendship, should permeate all those activities constituting the evangelizing mission of the church. The incarnation of our Lord Jesus is ultimately an image and an example of dialogue. God, becoming man, sharing our human life and speaking in a human language to bring the good news, is an example of deep solidarity that moves the church's dialogue with peoples, cultures, and religion. Interreligious dialogue, according to the CBCP, does not merely aim at mutual understanding and friendly relations. It reaches a much deeper level, which is spiritual. And in this dialogue of the Spirit, exchange and sharing consist in mutual witnessing to one's beliefs and a common exploration of one's respective religious convictions. Anticipating the points also asserted by the Holy Father in Fratelli, Tutti, the Filipino bishops asserted that the ultimate purpose of dialogue is for the whole humanity to live in harmony and fraternal love. Practicing human fraternity means embracing all human beings and trying to be united and treating each other with respect. It requires preserving and protecting the freedom that is a right of every person, where each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. The bishops then proposed 4 forms of dialogue that can help achieve these goals. Number 1, the dialogue of life, where people strive to live in an open and neighborly spirit, sharing their joys and sorrows, their human problems and preoccupations. Number 2, the dialogue of action, in which Christians and others collaborate for the integral development of liberation of people. Number 3, the dialogue of theological exchange, where specialists seek to deepen their understanding of their respective religious heritages and to appreciate each other's spiritual values. And number 4, the dialogue of religious experience, where persons rooted in their own religious traditions share their spiritual riches, for instance, with regard to prayer and contemplation, faith, and ways of searching for God or the Absolute. The call to live in harmony, according to the bishops, asks us to love one another concretely. It calls us to respect each other with all our differences, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to protect the rights and freedoms of all humanity. This is what it means to be Catholic. This is the way of the Church. This is what she has been contributing to Philippine society for the past 5 centuries. This is also her way of moving forward. The words of Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti affirms it powerfully. And I quote, "Called to take root in every place, the Church has been present for centuries throughout the world, for that is what it means to be Catholic." She can thus understand from her own experience of grace and sin the beauty of the invitation to universal love. Indeed, all things human are our concern. Wherever the councils of nations come together to establish the rights and duties of man, we are honored to be permitted to take our place among them. For many Christians, this journey of fraternity also has a mother, whose name is Mary. Having received this universal motherhood at the foot of the cross, she cares not only for Jesus, but also for the rest of her children. In the power of the risen Lord, she wants to give birth to a new world where all of us are brothers and sisters, where there is room for all those whom our societies discard, where justice and peace are resplendent. Let me end by proposing some points for further reflection. Number 1. If we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, do I make effort to know about my neighbor's religion? Number 2. Knowing is not just an intellectual pursuit, but is a deep personal knowledge of the person. It means overcoming fear. What do I fear most about getting to know my neighbor? And number 3, if the goal of dialogue is to establish fraternity, peace, and harmony, how have I established these values within myself and thus become a person of authentic dialogue? So I leave you with these 3 points for further reflection. Thank you for your attention and have a good day.
Thank you, Father Rolly. That meeting of Pope Francis with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar was truly significant. Their common appeal to adopt dialogue as the way to human fraternity is in perfect harmony with Pope Francis' conviction that all religions are in the service of fraternity. Father Rolly will answer your questions at a Zoom meeting on January 30 next year. In the meantime, you may write your comments, observations, or even questions to upm1phils@gmail.com. I repeat, upm1phils@gmail.com, and we will get in touch with you. Thank you for being with us this evening. Our lessons are held every third Friday of the month at 7 o'clock in the evening. Our next appointment is on Friday, January 21, 2022, at the same time and in the same channel. Have a nice evening, and God be with you.